Hello. Our group has created a video on early United States history from 1763 to 1789, also known as the Revolutionary Era. I will discuss 4 main themes from this era over the course of this video. Let's get started with number 1. The colonists were justified in rebelling against the British. The British passed the Stamp Act in 1765, causing newspapers and documents to have to buy stamps to be published. The problem the colonists had with this was that they were not represented in Parliament when they were taxed. Here is a public letter on the front page of the Boston Gazette in October 1765 in response to the Stamp Act. My dear countrymen, it is a standing maxim of English liberty that no man shall be taxed but with his own consent, and you know very well that we were not, in any sober sense, represented in Parliament where this tax was imposed. Awake! Awake, my countrymen, and defeat those who want to enslave us. Do not be cowards. I urge you to tell your representative that you do not support this terrible and burdensome law. Let them know what you think. After this, Britain passed the Tea Act in 1773, and the colonists responded with the Boston Tea Party, throwing many crates of British tea into the Boston harbor. After this, Britain then passed the Intolerable Acts in 1774, which included the Boston Port Act, which closed the port to all trade, the Massachusetts Government Act, which set up a British officer as governor of Massachusetts, the Administration of Justice Act, which made British officers unable to be tried in the 13 colonies, and the Quebec Act, which gave lands the colonies were starting to settle to Quebec. However, the 13 colonies were only colonies, and so some argued that Britain had every right to tax them even without representation. However, even colonies have basic rights as British subjects, so this was a very bad argument for taxing the British colonies. Next, we will look at the colonists defeating the British was surprising. During the beginning of the war, the colonists had less troops, money, supplies, and skill. This made it almost impossible for the colonists to keep up with the British. The colonists gave all their effort and won a few battles, but if the French wouldn't have come, the colonists would have been swiftly defeated. Here are some of the numbers from the Revolutionary War. Britain had 56,000 British troops and 30,000 German mercenaries on their side. They were also the richest country in the world at this time, and more wealth meant that their troops were better supplied and were better fighters. And they even had 96 naval ships at one point, so they dominated the seas. The colonists, on the other hand, had 80,000 troops once the French came, so before that they were at a large disadvantage. They were also a brand new nation, so they didn't have much wealth, and less wealth meant that their troops were less supplied and not as well trained. And the French provided the only naval ships that the colonists had over the entire Revolutionary War. The Battle of Saratoga was a turning point of the Revolutionary War, where the colonists defeated a large British army, which inspired the French to join in on the colonist side. Here is a quote from General Cornwallis at Saratoga to Sir Henry Clinton in October 20, 1781. I have the mortification to inform your Excellency that I have been forced to give up the posts of York and Gloucester, and to surrender the troops under my command as prisoner of war to the combined forces of America and France. Some might say that because the French came, it wasn't a surprise anymore that the colonists would win, but even though the French may have had a big part in it, the British still had way more supplies and money than the colonists and the French together, which made them very hard to beat. Thirdly, we will look at the Constitution was stronger than the Articles of Confederation. Under the Articles of Confederation, the states had more power than the federal government. The states had the taxing power, not the federal government, which caused the federal government to have to beg for money for the states to pay their expenses. The states also had individual armies, which meant the federal government couldn't control much military power. The federal government also had no control over states' trade, making it very hard to regulate that or impose any sort of tariffs. And there was also no executive leader with power, making the legislative branch the most powerful branch there. Under the Constitution, however, the federal government became more powerful than the states. The federal government could then tax, and also had a national army, which led it to be more powerful and able to actually do things. federal government could also regulate trade, impose tariffs, and import taxes. The president also had executive power, along with a system of checks and balances that didn't allow any one branch to become more powerful than the others. Anti-federalists argued that increased federal power would lead to a monarchy and severely limited rights for citizens. They demanded a Bill of Rights as a prerequisite to ratify the Constitution. The beginning of the United States Constitution reflects this weakness in the Articles of Confederation. It starts, "We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessing of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America." The next and final section we will talk about is George Washington setting many great examples during his first year as president. His first example that he has set was being called the President of the United States. There was debate over what to call him, ranging from His Magnificent George Washington to the President of the United States and Protector of the Rights of the Same, but he decided to stick with the President of the United States when he was elected as the first president on April 30, 1789. He also established the first cabinet, a group of men that would advise the president on many matters. This consisted of Thomas Jefferson, the Secretary of State, Alexander Hamilton, the Treasury Secretary, Henry Knox, the Secretary of War, and Edmund Randolph, the Attorney General. He also passed the Judiciary Act, establishing an Attorney General and a 6-man Supreme Court. From Section 1 of the Judiciary Act, "Be it enacted by the Senate and House of Representatives that the United States of America, in Congress assembled, that the Supreme Court of the United States shall consist of a Chief Justice and 5 Associate Justices." This is the beginning of the Judiciary Act, which establishes the Supreme Court and the national court system. Anti-Federalists argued that George Washington wanted to set himself up as a king because he acted like a king by dressing fancily and being brought everywhere in carriages. However, George Washington many times expressed a want to go back to Mount Vernon, to his house, and just live a quiet lifestyle there, and only agreed to become president with the cajoling of all his friends. In conclusion, the colonists were justified in rebelling against Britain because Britain ignored their basic rights as British citizens. It was also surprising that the colonists defeated the British because of the difference in wealth and military strength. The Constitution also provided a stronger government that didn't have to rely on the states for everything. Finally, George Washington set many important precedents in his first year, including establishing the court system and the President's Cabinet. Thank you for listening to this presentation on early American history. The end.